All right, y'all, what's happening? What's happening? Who's ready to hear about some Ravnica, y'all? That's what I'm talking about. All right, let's get into it. Let's get into it. All right, so 20 years ago, the idea of Ravnica, a city the size of a plane, represented by 10 guilds, began to manifest inside the halls of Wizards of the Coast. In 2024, we've enjoyed the nostalgia of Ravnica Remastered and then returned to Ravnica as a setting for the 4th time with Murders at Karlov Manor. Let's dive in to see why this plane has been so impactful and special to the game, creating a foundation for Magic of today. To do this, please welcome our panel, Aaron Forsythe, Roy Graham, Mark Rosewater, and Zach Stella.
All right, I got a water.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, it filled up a little bit.
Right.
All right, so let's jump right into it. So Mark,
Okay.
head designer of Magic, what is the Ravnica Influence?
Well, I think that this is my 29th year working on Magic. I have led or co-led like 40-some sets. I've worked on like 100 sets. I think this is the most influential set that I ever worked on. That as far as impacting future Magic, I just think Ravnica was, in many ways, as we'll discuss today, groundbreaking.
Nice, nice. And Aaron, Vice President of Game Design, your definition?
Yeah, the Ravnica influence for me is just the indelible mark it's made on how we talk about two-color combinations and just the labels that we use for decks and color combinations ever since the set came out.
Yeah, definitely. Roy, Senior Store Lead, how do you see the Ravnica Influence?
For me, the Ravnica Influence is super personal. It was the first set I started playing with Magic.
Same
It was
here.
the one I nice. It was the one I came in on. So for me, it's always going to have that very special place in my heart.
Nice. All right, cool. And Zach, Senior Art Director.
You know, this is such a visually dense setting. I feel like this is probably it's single-handedly the most important setting we've ever worked on in terms of how we think about world building, and especially as it relates to how our current style guides are formatted.
Nice. All right, so let's go back to the beginning. All right, so how did Magic's home plane come about? Mark, let's start with you.
Okay, so in 2003, I became head designer, and the very first block that I was in charge of was Ravnica.
Nice.
I think we had allocated it was going to be a gold block. Now, we had previously done a gold block. Invasion was the very first block that had a theme to it. And so this was the first time we were going back to a theme.
Okay.
And so my goal was make an exciting gold block that isn't Invasion. And Invasion was all about play as many colors as possible. So I'm like, what's the exact opposite of that? Okay, play as few colors as possible, but in order to be a gold set, you had to have 2 colors. So I'm like, okay, play 2 colors. And I was really fascinated by the idea that we cared about all 10 pairs. That was kind of radical at the time. And so that was my goal. Okay, let's care about the 10 2-color pairs. And so I pitched this idea to the creative team, and the lead of the creative team at the time was a man named Brady Domerith. So he went home one day, he was exercising, and the next day he goes, I got it. What if we made each one of those, we made a guild, it represented an actual group, and that we could faction all 10 of them. And then he said, once he came up with the idea of the guilds, he goes, it had to be a city, it just made sense if it was a city.
Right.
And then we fleshed those out, and I was in the second he said the idea, and then we did something pretty radical, which was we carved it up. So the original Ravnica block, 4 of the 10 pairs were in the first set, then 3, then 3. Okay. And when I first pitched this idea to the R&D, they're like, okay, so the first set just has 4 combinations? Yes. Well, what about the others? They're later. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, they'll come later. And it was definitely, it took a little while to get people warmed up to it, but once they did, it did a really good job of doing what I was trying to do as head designer. Was I really wanted to do more block building, and the idea was, this is what I call the pie method, which is you take it, you chop it into 3, and then every set's doing something unique that's its own.
That's true. All right, so Aaron, just how big of a deal was the 4-3-3 structure?
Yeah, so this was when I first came into the studio as a game designer under Mark. I was still a novice, but when he he and Brady pitched this idea of we're going to take this world and cut it up into thirds and deliver you a third at a time. I mean, to me, that sounded incredible because I knew that if they were all in one set together, how you would draft it would be a big mess and it would never feel the right way. But if we sliced it up this way, then players could experience each one in a more individualized way. And it sounded great to me, so I kind of became Mark's hype man on this project, where I had to try to convince all of the other people that were worried about it or didn't like it that this was a good idea. So we convinced the two important people that meant the most. Randy Bueller, who was the director of R&D at the time, and his boss, Bill Rose, who was and still is the VP of the entire studio, that this was a good idea. And the rest of the design team, I mean, they disagreed. There was some amount of disagreeing commit. Sure, we'll try it. We'll see how it works. Although, even through a lot of its development, there were still people that didn't like it. There was a lot of turnover on design teams because they weren't into it and they didn't think it was going to be a good idea. But we rammed it through, and it turned out to be the right thing to do.
All right, so I guess a lot was going on inside the building. So can you tell me, Aaron, what happened when you started sharing those ideas outside with the people?
Yeah, so we had a couple of teams of playtesters outside the building that we would often print card stickers out and send to them. So they were like multiplayer, casual, at-home play groups. This is in the days before Commander even existed as a format. But we just, we could do all the like one-on-one competitive testing in-house, and we would outsource to more casual at-home players to get their feedback. So we sent them a bunch of stickers of just the first set, just Ravnica. That was just 4 guilds. And the feedback we got back from them was kind of exactly the problem that the naysayers, or people didn't understand it. They're like, we don't get this. Why is there only 4 color combinations? Why do some get 2 and some get 1? And this doesn't make any sense to us, and we don't like it. It's like, oh no. So now, granted, none of the creative was in place. None of the card names were there. There was obviously no art. But at that moment, I was still like, I still think this is right. We can still make this happen. That is where the subtitle, the City of Guilds, comes from in the card name. We were originally just going to call the set Ravnica and leave it at that. But I'm like, I think we have to say City of Guilds. Just get it out in the open right away. Try to get people to understand what we're going for here from minute one. Mark was not a fan of that decision at the time. I think it's great. I think it's great.
To be clear, both Brady and I were like, look, we believe in the creative. It'll communicate it. They'll get it. And then Brady and I went on vacation on the same week. And then they changed the name. So
don't go on vacation. That's
from a visual standpoint, I love the logo that actually has City of Guilds written on the bottom.
In retrospect, it was the right call. I found it funny that they did it when I wasn't there. That's all.
All right, so let's explore some of the elements that make Ravnica Ravnica. So Aaron, the 10 guilds were fully revealed across 3 sets. How did they get divided up?
Right, so we knew we were going to split them up somehow. We knew we wanted to have every color as represented as possible. But from there, which 4 were going to be first? And then how are we going to divide these up? So we had our rules manager at the time, a fellow named Paul Barclay, built an Excel spreadsheet. We had collected a little bit of data from a poll on one of our articles on magicthegathering.com. They said, which 2-color combination do you like the best? And we got all the votes, a few thousand votes on that. The winner, the most favorite 2-color combination at the time was blue and black. So we knew we wanted that in the first set so that the most people would be happy to see their guild show up. The least popular color combination at the time was red-white. So we knew we also wanted that one in the first set as well, just to kind of bury it in the set that had 4. And from there, it was just like, okay, we want to make sure we have the right amount of aggro and slower strategies, so assign point values to those, and build this big matrix spreadsheet that spit out, I think, two answers that checked all the boxes, and we just picked the one, where we had Selesnya, Dimir, Golgari, and Boros all in the first set, and the rest of it just kind of fell out from there.
Nice. Boros, a lot of Boros haters out there. Boros gang. So you were the lead designer on Dissension, the 3rd block in the set. You also worked on 5th Dawn, another 3rd set. So how did those experiences differ?
Right, so 5th Dawn, I mean, as Mark was saying, he wanted to put some more block structure in place. So 5th Dawn kind of predated that. And that was back when the first set in that block was Mirrodin, comes up with a setting, a bunch of cool mechanics. The second set then is left to figure out how to iterate on those mechanics a little bit, maybe add one more. The third set is then left to, I don't know, iterate again or try see what's left. The problem with Mirrodin was that like the first set had affinity and equipment, and those mechanics were like so incredibly powerful that there was like no room to add more cards that had those mechanics to it. So Fifth Dawn was kind of a mess. Like, you have nothing. You can't build off the stuff we already did. It's already too powerful. Try making up some other stuff. Made up Sunburst. Anyway, it was not a particularly great experience.
We made Scry. You made
I went off for a year. I didn't work on Kamigawa at all. I worked on the G.I. Joe TCG during that year. Anyway, came back, got to work on Magic again with the Ravnica block, and got put in charge of leading Dissension. And because of the way that was set up, there were 3 whole guilds that no cards were made for at all leading up to that. So it was just like this wonderful assignment of like, you know how the structure is going to work. You have to make the rest of the signets. You have to make some legendary creatures to lead these. But other than that, do whatever you want. Come up with whatever keywords you want. It was a blank slate. It was super fun, and I loved the way leading that set felt.
Nice, nice. So Mark, the 3 block set had been in a recognizable pattern of major and minor mechanics. So what was different about Ravnica, and how did you approach the challenge of creating so many mechanics?
So here's the big difference about Ravnica was the guilds were the most exciting thing. And the guilds were bigger than just a mechanic. But we realized that in order to sort of sell the guilds, we wanted each guild to have a mechanic. But that meant, normally, if you go back to early Magic, it was like we'd have like 2 mechanics. It's like flanking and phasing, or shadow and buyback or something.
Right.
But really what I realized is, in order to play into the theme of guilds, I wanted each guild to have something unique. I wanted them to have their own keyword. But that was smaller than the footprint of a normal keyword in a set.
Right.
It was like 8 to 12 cards. And it wasn't the most important thing. It was more about giving it flavor than like the set wasn't going to be sold on, hey, what are the 4 mechanics? It's going to be, hey, it's the City of Guilds and all the guilds.
Right,
and the colors really took over. And it allowed us to make kind of a different class of mechanics. They can be mechanics that were smaller, mechanics that had less design space, and that didn't have to carry quite as much weight.
Right.
Yeah, we definitely learned over time that we don't need, A-level keywords for these Ravnica guilds. We need to make a small number of cards with them. The structure itself is going to sell the set. So, I mean, like, we made Haunt. Haunt is not a good keyword in the big picture of Magic. We made Cipher. Cipher is not a good keyword in the big picture of Magic, but they did their jobs at the time. Now, every so often, sure, we'll end up with a banger like Convoke, which Richard Garfield actually designed for the first Ravnica, or Dredge. There are mechanics that have a lot more to give to Magic, and we can make more cards of them later, and we will. We'll go back and revisit those. But as far as like what we're looking for now when we go back to Ravnica, it's flavorful things, it's niche things, it's things with a lot smaller footprint.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say also as someone who entered the game on that set, it wasn't the like excitement of like, oh, sweet Haunt, I can put my old card on top of my new card. It was the flavor.
You wound me, sir.
Oh, Radiant! I want to play Magic.
Yeah, it was the flavor that was really exciting to me, and I think at that point familiar with the colors in a general sense. I had some friends who had taught me generally how to play, but seeing the like collision of these colors, not just mechanically but like philosophically, and that to me was the most exciting thing about Ravnica, and coming into that, seeing like especially the like diametrically opposed pairs, right? Like white, the color of like order and justice and law and community, paired with black, which is about like power and ambition and all of these things coming together into this like cult pyramid scheme is just it's so brilliant.
It just screams church. Doesn't it?
Our joke at the time was Orzhov is organized crime. Organized white, crime black.
That's right.
Hey, so Zach, talk to us about the visual language that the guilds evolved over the years.
Sure. So as I said before, like Ravnica is an incredibly visually dense setting. I don't think that we had ever seen really in fantasy, anything that was like quite like it in terms of like a full plane-wide city. So making sure that those color identities read properly across a city setting was like super important. We've also been to this plane 4 or 5 times, like in a main set at this point, like not including commander decks or anything like that. So each time has led to its own set of visual challenges. So like the first time around, and the art director's been different every time. So the first time around, Jeremy Cranford's main job was to fit those 2-color pairs into the city setting. So if you can see from like the Golgari examples, it was like, how do we put witches basically into a city where it actually makes sense? And then once that's established, the next time around, the visual challenge then becomes like, all right, well, what do they actually do? Like we have our set of like 20 witches. Like now, what do they actually do to actually fit into like a city society, basically? So like, how do they actually have their identity form over the next set? And then once that is in place, the third time around can then bring in like narrative into the equation, where like we see like Vraska in the Golgari example, where like she's actually got story relevance, like what is she doing in the Undercity at the time, like how has their fashion changed to reflect the fact that she's going to be leading an uprising. If we go to like the next slide, I think it's is it? Yeah, so is it like the first time around it was like, how do we solve what the mind mad wizard is? Like, have we had before Ravnica, was there actually a blue-red wizard like pairing at all? Like, had that identity been
Not
formed
in
yet?
any regularity, no.
Yeah, so that was the visual solve. And then after that is like, okay, well, they all look super old. Like we have this like crazy wizard, but now like every single one of them is like wild hair, Doc Brown style. Let's dial it back. We got to make them young and hip again. And then after that, it's like, well, okay, now like how do they? What's their place in the story? Like, what's their visual identity? Like now that they can like actually branch free of like the earlier visual problems. And then if we go to our last slide, which I believe is the Dimir, Jeremy Jarvis, who is the lead for Return to Ravnica, had lovingly referred to the first go-around as dudes wearing other dudes, which I absolutely adore, but like clearly that only works for a set number of cards. It's not really society friendly, so it's like, well, how do they actually look like a cohesive guild that like has some street presence?
Right. I mean, so now that we can see the guilds are a huge deal. I mean, not just for Ravnica, but for all of Magic.
Yeah, almost to our detriment sometimes. Like when we make a new setting that has 2-color factions, we went to Strixhaven, which was a plane based around a magical school. And we came up with new factions there. We made a black-green one, and we were like, it's called Witherbloom. We would like you to call this Witherbloom this year. It's like, oh yeah, I have a Golgari deck. It's like, okay. And so, very sticky, very powerful, yeah, just we have to try to convince people, let's not use that word this time. We got to call it something else.
No, I mean, I'm definitely Silver Quill all day, you know what I mean,
yeah.
gang. But Roy, it wasn't just about the guilds that were important, it was the whole ecosystem.
Right, yeah. I mean, one of the cool things about Ravnica is it's one of these planes we've gone back to so many times, like Zach was talking about, and that means that there's been all of this iteration, not just mechanically and artistically, but also narratively, right? It's just a wonderful plane to tell stories on. I think up there you'll see like a character who has never actually had a legend card, but her name is Maleva from Flavor Text, and yeah, we got a Maleva fan out there.
Hey, we got some love out there.
She's shown up a couple of times every time we go back to Ravnica, and has always like climbed one step further up the Boros hierarchy each time. That's the kind of stuff that you can do because of Ravnica's like incredibly deep world building. And I think we actually we just saw her hitting the streets as a detective, donning the fedora of murders at Karlov Manor.
Yep.
But then, you have so many, because of that depth of storytelling that's already been done in Ravnica, you also have all these incredible locations. You have these deeply important visuals and the Bolas's Citadel and that big maze and all of that stuff.
I mean, of course, they're the headquarters of each guild, too, which in-game are the Shocklands.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, so let's look at some Shocklands.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, here, it became a matter of how to set up our 2 colors across various environments in a city setting.
Yeah.
Rob Alexander did an awesome job on the first set of Shocklands, and they all certainly read as 2 colors in a city setting. You can see from the Temple Garden here, it absolutely reads as something that is both white and green. But over time, that's been finessed where we can actually get a sense of the guilds as time progresses. They weren't necessarily set up as the main hideouts for the guilds, but they've become so popular over time that it's just sort of been cemented into their identity.
Right.
So with Temple Garden, it was okay, well, we have a white-green church, but it could also potentially be perceived as a Golgari setting if you're not looking at any sort of visual motifing. The next time around, we gave it a visual motifing for a Selesnya symbol. And then the last time around, again, when we're adding a narrative, maybe we can actually make it Vitu-Ghazi or something that's very specific to them. Right. If we go to the next one, I think it's Hallowed Fountains. Again, first one is very much just city fountain. And then we've actually cemented it over time as a very specific Azorius location, that is literally set up to look like the Azorius symbol from the top.
Yep.
And then our last set is Blood Crypts. Not really a sense of place the first time around, other than being a red-black city setting. But by the time we get to the last one,
bad in the first time.
Yeah, it's a little tortury. The last one though, has one of my favorite visual details we've ever built into any one of our settings, let alone Ravnica, and it's the stairs for the Rakdos are set up for a demon. They're not set up for people. So if you can see the human figures in the back, they're super tiny because the stairs and the doorways are actually sized up for Rakdos.
Nice, nice. That's really cool. So Mark, where did the Shocklands even come from?
Okay, so obviously the original dual lands existed in Alpha.
Right.
And those were a little too good. So in Ice Age, they made pain lands. So those were dual lands that every time you tap them, they did damage to you. And then in Invasion, we made tap lands that were 2-color lands that came and played tapped. And neither pain lands nor tap lands were quite good enough. It took us a while. Our R&D took a while to realize we just need to be more aggressive with our dual lands. So when we were making the idea I came up with was, well, what if it was a pain land or a tap land that you could decide? So you could have it come and play tapped, or you could have it come and play and then it does damage. But rather than making you track every turn, because that just seemed like a lot of work, okay, we'll just pick an amount of damage. We ended up picking 2, which is convenient because it's called Shocklands. Yeah. And so anyway, so we took this, we handed it over in design, over to development, and then Brian Schneider, who's the lead developer, just didn't like them at the time. And so they go, we're going to try something else, and they put them aside. And then late in the process, he came back to me and he goes, could we use them? I think we want to use them. And so they had tried a lot of other different things, and just nothing else actually ended up working quite as cleanly as the Shocklands.
Yeah. I mean, they're great. They're using everything now, especially in Commander. And so, Aaron, Shocklands were important beyond Ravnica in game, and also from a business perspective.
Oh, yeah. It's funny because when we first conceived of them, the instructions to the creative team was, give these names that we can use anywhere. We don't want to tie these things specifically to Ravnica, so don't call it Azorius Fountain, just call it something else. So, okay, Hallowed Fountain it is. And then lo and behold, we've just keep reprinting them in Ravnica.
And Infinity.
Right. So Infinity actually did give us, our first glimpse of what these could look like in a different setting. I promise you, at some point, we're going to deliver on them in a different setting. But they've become so synonymous with Ravnica. And as Mark mentioned, like, we had been pretty skittish about dual lands. There's always just been a feeling in the department of, like, if we make the mana too good, the game kind of breaks down. People just put whatever cards they want in the deck, and we don't want to do that. But if we're going to make a gold set or a gold block full of multicolored cards that cost 2 different colors, it's a 2-drop that you need green mana and black mana to cast. Like, you have to have good lands, or these cards just are never going to show up in anybody's decks. So. We tried Mark's design for Shocklands. We tried a whole bunch of other designs. Eventually came back to those. I mean, he had figured it out right away. And that's exactly what the set needed. And they've become, pillars of Modern, Pioneer. Every time they're in Standard, used a lot in Commander as well. So, I mean, they've kind of been the best dual lands we've made for just tapping for mana, apart from the ones from Alpha. So, total home run on all fronts.
And also, Aaron, the first Ravnica was just, brilliant in hindsight. It was a home run at the time. So why did it take 7 years to get back to it?
That's a good question. The trying to figure out the pacing of when it's correct to go back to a popular setting has been a puzzle for us, and it continues to be a puzzle for us even now. Like, there's no one answer that makes the most sense. If we go back too soon somewhere, players are like, we've just seen that. It's like, it's been 5 years. It's like, nope, we've just seen that. The cards were only out of Standard for a little bit, or I still play with the cards in my Modern and Commander deck, so I'm not bored of it yet, and so it doesn't feel new to me. All right, well, that's no good. If we wait too long, we end up dancing around it, and it's like, we would like to make another gold set that's not Ravnica. It's like, well, why don't we just go back to Ravnica? So there's just a lot of struggles. We picked 7 years. The next time we went back in, only 5. 7 felt too long. 5 felt like it was maybe a little too short for the third one. So we continued to puzzle through this every time we want to go back to a new setting. But we have definitely not seen the last of Ravnica.
Nice.
You heard it here.
All right, so when we did go back, it was a big moment. So here's the announcement of Return to Ravnica from PAX. Cue it up. Or.
So before you all stand up, though, there is one more thing we thought you might want to know.
We're not going to take any more questions.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming.
All right. And Ravnica has been a big part of our lives since then. Mark, so what has been the influence on the Ravnica design?
So it did a lot of different things. That's how, when we say it's influential, it's not like one thing. The first thing it did is it really said to us the importance of factions, like how powerful factions are. So much so that, like, we make sure, like, about once a year that we do a set that has factions in it. Obviously, we did Streets of New Capenna. We did Khans of Tarkir. We did Strixhaven. We keep looking for different places that we can do factions. Yeah. And it's just been super, super powerful. It really was something that it was like a new tool that just opened up what Magic sets could be.
Nice.
And one of the things about it, that Roy talked about this, is there's something so personal about I'm this thing.
Yeah.
There's 10 factions, but I pick one.
Yeah.
I'm Selesnyan, or I'm Dimir. Like, there's something about it that really speaks from, like, a core psychological level that I think is super impactful. And we've really learned that there's a lot of fun, different ways to do factions. It also taught us the power of colors as the center of factions, and that the color buy is so awesome, and it really, you can mix and match them and do all sorts of really interesting things with them.
Yeah.
The other thing that it did, or one of the other things it did, is like Aaron was saying, early on in Magic, it was like we'd make a set and then just vamp for 2 more sets, like do new things. And when I took over as head designer, I'm like, okay, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to plan. We're going to say the first set and the second set and the third set mean something, and that there's evolution to it. For example, like Scars of Mirrodin, like, okay, we discover the Phyrexians are here. There's a giant war between the Phyrexians and the Mirrans. And the third set, we're not even going to tell you the name. We're not even going to, like, is it New Phyrexia? Is it Mirrodin Pure? You have to wait till go to the store to find out. Like, it meant something, and each set meant something. Khans of Tarkir, for example, I was given the dictum that we wanted Khans of Tarkir and Dragons of Tarkir to be large sets that weren't drafted together. So I'm like, okay, what if we did something fun? And so we did this whole time travel story where Khans of Tarkir, there's no dragons, but Sarkhan loves dragons. So he goes back in time, and Fate Reforged is earlier in time, and he changes the timeline. He brings the dragons back. And now, the reason Fate Reforged is drafted with both sets is it was the past, and there's different timelines, and you draft the timeline.
Yeah.
That really made something, it gave a compelling element to it. Time Spio, for example, was past, present, and future. It was clean. Each set did something the other sets didn't. And even though we've moved away from a block structure, definitely the idea of every set, in fact, I would argue that this idea moved us away from the block structure is we want every set to have an identity that's its own thing. Now, another thing that it did is the idea of the guilds being the lifeblood of the set really introduced the idea of there needs to be a singular thing that is going to, what drives the set, what makes people care about the set, and that we can imbue that thing throughout the set. And whether it's gothic horror or fairy tales or Japanese pop culture, like whatever it is we're infusing it in, it really taught us that the mechanics are not, the mechanics serve the theme. Like early Magic was, we would sell the mechanics.
Right.
And what we finally realized is, don't sell the mechanics, sell the theme, and making mechanics makes the theme work. And all these things were things we learned. These are all things that we learned from Ravnica.
Right.
Yeah, and the other, I'll chime in that just the way we set up draft archetypes now, the 2 colors are kind of how things, the vast majority of how players want to experience limited play, and that giving each pair a flavor or a theme or a thing it's trying to do that's a little different from its neighbors allows for draft sets to be a lot more replayable and have a lot more depth to them. And that's something that I'll say the very first Ravnica block didn't do particularly well. The 4-3-3 model was really cool, revolutionary, and it allowed us to make the sets feel really different. But when you drafted that full block, it was kind of a mess. You could not, while you could draft the first set alone and draft a Selesnya deck and really experience that guild in its totality, by the time you got to Dissension, if you wanted to draft just a Rakdos deck, there was no real way to do that because you'd have 1 pack of Dissension, 1 pack of Guild Pact, and 1 pack of Ravnica, and 2/3 of the packs just didn't have any cards for your guild at all. So when we went back, we figured the 5 and 5 method was way better. And draft those separately, and that let each player experience, each of the first 5 guilds, each of the second 5 guilds, be able to come up with decks, draft decks that showed off each one of them individually. So that was a big learning point from that first guild model.
Nice, nice. Also, that's the Ravnica influence on design. Roy, how about story?
I mean, if you talk about Magic story, you sort of have to talk about Ravnica. The story of Magic story is also the story of Ravnica story. It's been with us through almost every model of storytelling that Magic has had over the years. The first Ravnica came at the near the end of the pre-mending era of storytelling, where a lot of the books we were publishing were published by Wizards, and the lore was sort of tangentially connected to the card set, a little loose. The story was related there, but not quite as tight as it is now. The return to Ravnica in 2012 was the time when we were doing a lot of experimenting with various methods of story delivery. There was web short stories being published. There was a choose your own adventure game. There was an ebook written on like nights and weekends by Doug Beyer.
Oh, wow.
And then, flash cut to War of the Spark, which let us do a lot of things. War of the Spark, at this point, we've started working with like established authors like Nikki Drayden and Django Wexler. We also, so we're working with like authors, real published authors, and at the same time, we're introducing this idea in War of the Spark of like an event set, right? It's something that is the set itself is structured around the story, and that like marriage of story and mechanics, the fiction that you're reading and the card set itself is like never stronger, right, than it is in that moment, and it lets us do things like Murders at Karlov Manor, which is also one of those event sets. It's set in Ravnica, but it's not really a Ravnica faction set in the same way.
Right.
It's about the story, which is lets us explore that like murder mystery fun genre trope thing.
We love that. And so, Zach, you worked on Ravnica Allegiance as an artist. What was that experience like?
I did. So I've been a player since 1994. I was in middle school, so like Roy, you're making me feel ancient for Ravnica being your first set. I was in college when that came out, and it had been my visual. My goal in my Magic journey has always been to like kind of check off all of the planes as I'm going through, and I kind of hit right after Return to Ravnica. So I had still not done any work on Ravnica. So it was kind of a dream for me to like actually visit it as a setting in my paintings.
Yeah.
I will say one thing that like all the artists absolutely love is painting many buildings in perspective. No, that's terrible. It's just awful. But it's a challenge, and like like anything, it adds to your visual repertoire once you get that in, and so it was super fun to work on. It was really fun to like actually paint the guilds as I would see them, and like how I would keep the designs fresh.
Nice. And I mean, now you're art director for Murders at Karlov Manor. So what are the challenges of working on a Ravnica set from that side of the desk inside Wizards?
So Deborah Garcia led. She's the lead art director for Murders, and I was like her secondary. She wanted to ensure that not only was she keeping the setting fresh, because now it's the fourth go around, but she wanted to make sure that like all of the visual motifs that we needed for a murder mystery actually fit into the city setting. So it's like, how do you incorporate hats? Like, how do the fedoras work there? Like, what is the solve, the magical solve for police tape?
Right.
How do we establish like a murder on a train? Does Ravnica have a train? We decided that Ravnica does have a train. I think it only shows up on like the interior on one card, but if we ever see it on the outside, it's actually on the back of a giant moving centipede. Yeah, it was a lot of cool, fun visual solves for that.
That's so cool. So like everything on Ravnica, the guilds have developed over time. What do guilds look like through a contemporary Magic lens?
Yeah, so again, like as time has passed, we've had to incorporate different things that actually fit the setting and the story, and like now it can be approached in that sort of like we want to hit murder mystery and not necessarily Ravnica. We want to use it as a backdrop. So, like, what does a Boros detective look like? What's the Simic detective? Like, what does a Gruul do in this case?
Yeah.
I think like they might have gotten the short end of the stick, because I don't think they have any detectives. They only show up in the set as like maybe an informant or something behind bars. Rakdos over time too has been like they've steadily gotten this like horror murder carnival aesthetic over time. So like, well, what do they do now that we've got a mystery going, like without actually presenting them as murdery all the time? And it's like, so well, now they run a nightclub.
Right. All right, so it's clear that Wizards found something really special in Ravnica 20 years ago, and that Ravnica will continue to be a part of Magic's designs, Magic stories, and Magic's incomparable art. In a moment, we'll open the floor to Ravnica questions for our panel, but first, let's see how deep the Ravnica influence runs. So Zach, if you were living on Ravnica, which guild would you belong to and why?
I would hands down be Is It because of the mad creationary elements that they have. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And what about yourself, Roy?
I actually took one of those like online, like which guild are you in test a little while ago, and I got Rakdos.
Yes.
Which I guess I see. You know, it's
I don't know you're supposed to tell people that.
loud and proud, baby. Yeah.
And Aaron?
I've always identified with Boros. I guess I have I personally have a strong sense of justice, and I don't mind getting into fights. I wouldn't say I'm a big military guy, but philosophically, I do appreciate the way they get stuff done.
Okay, all right. And what about you, Mark?
I am primary red, secondary blue, so is it? Yeah.
All right, all right. Okay, so that's where you see yourselves, but now the big one is, which guild would you like to be in?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I think Orzhov because they make being bad look good, and I know I will not be Selesnya because I've fallen off of a horse way too many times.
Hey, I'm right with you there.
Yeah, I think if I were a centaur, I'd just tip over.
Right.
Well, I'd love to, in a fantasy setting, destroy a fantasy oil pipeline. So I got to go with the gruel on this one.
All right, all right. We won't dive in too deep on that one.
For me, if I was actually living in Ravnica, I have to pick Selesnya, right? It's got to. They take the best care of each other. I'm a creature of comfort, and it looks like they got good living going on there for sure.
They would have the best food.
Yeah.
So I would pick Simic, just because I'm very inventive. I like the idea. There's something about they have an inventive spirit among them, and they're always trying things.
I know you just want gills.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be cool to have gills. I don't know.
And they would have the worst food.
What?
Best food, worst food.
It's a city. You can go to other food.
Oh, yeah, you can mingle. All right, so we've tried to show you the Ravnica influence on how it affects the game we all love. But Ravnica goes deep only if we scratch the surface. So if you've got any burning questions for us, now is the time.
Yeah, go to
Go
the
for it, yeah.
microphone. Yeah, line up at the microphone. That's great.
Hi. So you guys mentioned that the Shocklands were named very specifically so that you could reprint them on other planes.
Yes.
And it seems like you did that again with the Surveil lands. Now the Triomes, the Festival Triomes, are pretty good. Was there any reason you guys moved away from that naming convention with those specific lands? Also, bring back Spectacle, please.
Another Rakdos enjoyer in the house.
Hell yeah.
Well, with the Triomes in particular, the reason that those names ended up on those lands is because we figured there's going to be like among the most high-profile cards that those factions were going to have at all, and what better way to get players to learn what those words are than to put them on the most high-profile cards? Yes, that does come with a cost that reprinting them is a little stickier, but we have a broader product portfolio now with opportunities to put them in other things besides just other world-built sets, or we could go back to Ikoria or Capenna or wherever. So when the time comes to figure that out, I think we have ample tools to do so.
Yeah.
Hi. So in original Ravnica, we got a taste of the old gods and the Nephilim, and in the newer sets, we've gotten a few Gruul gods. Is there any chance we're ever going to learn about the history of Ravnica before it was a giant city and learn about those old gods some more?
Goodness, I hope so.
You're referring to the Utmungur, the pantheon of Gruul gods that are have been like recently prophesized to be waking up again. I don't know. That's a cool idea.
I know. I was lucky enough to.
The idea of going back to the original guild pact has come up a couple times, and so it is a long, rich history. So there's a lot of cool stuff to explore. I agree.
Yeah, I got to paint Priest of Forgotten Gods, so like I really want to see what exactly it is that she's worshiping in this case.
What did she forget?
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Ravnica is a world that we've been to so many times that it's almost become synonymous with its own changing status quo. Every time we go, it's so popular, and yet things keep changing. You see new guild leaders rise and characters that people are very fond of dying or finding new color identities, such as Niv Mizzet. How do you balance the handling of such a precious setting while simultaneously, switching it up and keeping it dynamic with each visit?
This might be kind of half creative and half design, depending on.
Creative, then I'll tell the design part.
I don't know. I feel like Roy's actually better
Roy,
equipped for
Why
this
don't you
one.
start
Yeah.
with design?
Okay, so one of the things that's really important is, from a design standpoint, the guilds have a very strong feel to them, and that one of the things we've done is we've really, there's a very strong play pattern established. Like if you're going to play Boros, you're going really aggressive, and that if you're more control, if you're Azorius, stuff like that. And so one of the things that we always want to do is every time we visit, we want to change up something, but we still, the rule of thumb is if you took all the cards that have the same guild symbol and put them in a deck together, they should cohesively feel like they made sense. We want all the Azorius cards to feel right. And so we try to be very subtle in the way we change things because we don't want to change so much that it doesn't feel like the guild. But the good news is, because they have such a strong sort of mechanical identity, we can be a little more flavorful with the creative, because what makes the Dimir more than anything is not any one character, but like the feel of the Dimir as a guild.
Yeah, and to speak a little bit to the creative side, Murders at Karlov Manor was like my first time doing like storytelling work in Ravnica, and it was a really interesting challenge because, like you're saying, Ravnica is like an incredibly deep plane with a enormous list of characters that people care about. And I think this is true in a lot of Magic, is that everyone has their like one favorite character. But like so many of those characters are from Ravnica and on Ravnica. And I knew really early on that to balance a story and to make it work, there was just no way that we could highlight every popular character from Ravnica. But the nice thing was this was not like a faction set. This was a murder mystery set. So that let us really focus down on like, okay, well, what's Judith doing in a murder mystery set? Obviously, like running a nightclub and scheming to, turn events in her favor. As long as we could kind of pigeonhole people into a particular trope space, it helped give us a reason to go back to them, I guess.
If I might just ask like a small follow-up from Mark, how does that design philosophy carry over to Murders at Karlov Manor, where you have all the same color pairs, of course, but you have a different focus in the foreground?
Yeah, so this is what we call a backdrop set. The idea being a lot of times we carve a mechanical component into a world, and the idea we've been playing around with, we did the Streets of we did it at Lost Caverns of Ixalan. We did it at War of the Spark. We're doing it here. Is that we have such rich worlds that we don't always have to invent a world to do something. And we originally, for Murders at Karlov Manor, we were going to build a brand new murder mystery world. And as we built it, it kept looking so close to Ravnica, we had to ask ourselves, why isn't this just Ravnica? And the nice thing about going to Ravnica is, hey, your murder suspect is someone you know, or murder suspects. The people that might have done the murder are people you know. It really added a lot of depth because people cared that if it's a brand new world with brand new characters that you didn't quite get. But what that meant was we weren't beholden. This is not a guild set. We weren't beholden to make. I mean, the color identities have some. We did want it to feel like it's on Ravnica, but we were nowhere near as beholden as in the guild set. So, certain colors are doing things that are not what they would do in Ravnica as a guild set. But they did here.
Thank you so much.
Hey, just a heads up, we probably got a couple more questions, and then we'll probably call it. So probably 1 and 2, and then everyone after. I'm probably not going to get to you guys, unfortunately.
All right. So you guys were talking earlier about when making new designs for the guilds, making sure they still feel right to the guild. On that note, which guilds are the easiest and hardest to work with?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different factors. So one of the funny stories for original Ravnica was when we were making the Azorius, in Standard, there was like a really powerful white-blue control deck. So we were told, can you please not do control with white-blue? And so I don't know if you remember this, like it has a flying deck, like this is the theme we had to do. And so when we went back and returned to Ravnica, we're like, okay, can we just do control? White-blue just wants to be control. And so it's I don't know, it's just a feel to it. It's you know what I'm saying, it's something that, it's something very comfortable working on a Ravnica set, that it comes back, I don't know, it comes back to you.
Yeah, I'd say Rakdos and Golgari are very easy to keep making cards for. Simic, you could just make weird looking stuff. That's just their bread. Azorius continues to be difficult because the gameplay that's implied by their guild philosophy of being like stultifying and bureaucratic is just not something we think adds a ton when overdone to the game. So yeah, we end up with a bunch of flyers and stuff like that, which
You
is
mean
not
paperwork?
Selesnya.
Faction isn't fun.
Right.
I would say I think Selesnya is one of the easiest ones because what white-green wants to do and kind of what Selesnya is, it's very, very easy to build cards for it.
Yeah. Is it can be difficult because their creatures are not really what it's about. It's about the magic and the spells and the inventions, and you have to make a bunch of what's a 4/4 supposed to be in Is It that barely makes any sense. They're all like little mad scientists and whatnot. So that one.
And
that
Is It has one more problem. They're mad inventors, but it's spell-based.
Right.
Like they're all like, kind of what they want to do is have all these artifacts because they're inventors, but no, they're the guild that's known about instants and sorceries, and so trying to feel like inventors but not have artifacts, it can be a challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I wanted to ask a little about the different abilities and keywords. How likely is Dredge to return? The graveyard is a resource I can be trusted with.
So I'm actually the creator of Dredge. When we were making original Ravnica, Golgari was our problem child in original Ravnica. We made like 40 mechanics. We kept trying making mechanics. The Dredge we handed over was, if the card was in your graveyard, you could just, instead of drawing a card, you could draw the card out of your graveyard, and they were overcosted was the idea. And so, okay, I could choose to draw this, but it's an overcosted card, but I could choose to get it. And then in development, they added the milling thing. And I joked with Brian Schneider years later, I go, it's not often I hand a mechanic, you make it stronger. That's not usually what happens. But it's a tricky, whenever you're sort of doing something that doesn't work the way normal things work, it's hard to work with because the correct Dredge strategy is not doing what the game normally does. Obviously we've had the graveyard mechanics, we've done other stuff like that. We clearly want graveyard lovers to have things to do with their graveyard, and we've come up with lots of fun mechanics. I don't know, Aaron can...
It's got to be pretty high on your storm scale.
Yes.
It is not something that we lightly put into other card files, that's for sure. So it may be a while.
As a little follow-up, in Limited versus Constructed, in Constructed you want a high Dredge count. In Limited, was that like Golgari Grave Troll, 6 is huge and that can kill you?
Right, in Limited it was put in there, because that's when our initial testing was for Limited, that one, I would never deck myself. I could just draw Stinkweed Imp every turn and block every creature you have, and you can't ever kill me, and then I just keep doing the same thing every turn, which is not something we aim for when we're developing the game. We don't want repetition to that degree. So we put a check in place, which was you can dredge Stinkweed Imp probably about 3 or 4 times before you're going to run out of cards. Of course, then that becomes the whole point of the card when you take it out of that context. So yeah, that it's really tough to develop that. Obviously, we did not do a great job the first time around, to the point where it's a fire we're not really interested in playing with, because I don't know that when we figure out the right numbers to put on them that people are going to like them. So it's a tough one.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, I think that was our last question, so that does it for us. We'll see you around the city of guilds. Please put your hands together for Selesnia's Aaron Forsyth. Brule's Roy Graham. Orzov's Zach Stella. And Simic's Rosewater. All right, y'all. I'm your host, Joe Johnson, saying goodbye. Boros forever. Wakanda. We out this thing.